Boundaries are very often spoken about, they're very often misunderstood, and they're very often used incorrectly and damagingly in a marriage, in a relationship. And tonight's topic is going to be, like I said, boundaries. Boundaries and a marriage. Boundaries in a marriage. Are they necessary? What does a boundary look like? Are there some helpful boundaries or boundaries which are hurtful? How to know if it's good or bad for your marriage, if it's going to contribute something positive or negative, what to do if there are deeper issues. And we have a lot to cover, so we'll get right into it. And as we go along, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave that in the comments on the side. Boundaries are very often spoken about, they're very often misunderstood, and they're very often used incorrectly and damagingly in a marriage, in a relationship. So it's really important to understand what it looks like when it's being used correctly, under which circumstances, and that's probably the first thing we should talk about tonight. So let's give examples just for the purpose of conversation. I'm going to give you a bunch of examples. You may relate to some or none of them, but you'll understand the idea, and then we'll go from there. Before we get in, I want to know from you, have you experienced trying to use boundaries? Have you heard conversations about boundaries? Have you used boundaries in your relationship and it didn't work or made things worse? And if you used it and it did improve your relationship, let me know in the comments over here, okay? So let's get into example. What's a boundary? A boundary, ideally, in a good situation, is an agreement between two couples, between the two members of a couple, right? One couple, two parties, both spouses agreeing on something that they know creates a boundary, a barrier, a protection around the marriage. One of the major mistakes where therapists or counselors use boundaries incorrectly is it seems like a boundary is like something that an individual imposes on another. This is my boundary. This is my standard. This is what I am willing to tolerate or what I'm not willing to tolerate, what I'm not going to put up with. You get what I'm saying? Ideally, and there is a place for that. We're going to talk about that tonight. But ideally, a healthy boundary is when there is an agreement between the couple, and the boundary isn't between me and you, between husband and wife. It is between the husband-wife unit and people outside that unit, influences outside that unit, outside that coupleship, outside that relationship. The boundary should be something which is protecting you and her from something negative, from other people's influence, other people's meddling, other or environmental influences. It's not necessarily people. It could be social media influences. And for example, okay, let's get into example of boundaries, and then we'll get back to different levels of help or hurtful boundaries or situations where a boundary won't help your relationship. So one boundary might be, for example, I touched on it a moment ago, social media. The boundary might be where I don't want to be on my phone past a certain time in the evening because then I cannot be present for the relationship, or you cannot be present for the relationship, or we both cannot be present for our kids. And if we're on our phones during dinner or after, and that is a time when we're supposed to have quality family time, or at the very least be available to have, deep, meaningful conversations with our kids, with each other. And that's a boundary, like, hey, between 6 and 8 p.m., we're not on our phones, for example, or we're not on social media, or it's going to really vary from one relationship to another, but I'm just giving you an idea. Another boundary could be, we don't spend more than X number of dollars without consulting each other. So you want to spend something, okay, don't go over $500 without consulting. Every couple will have their standards. Some couples will be 200, 300, 1,000, whatever it is. It's a boundary, an understanding, a mutual agreement of this is what we do. This is our rule of engagement. Are you guys following me? Does this make sense? Now, another boundary might be if the guy is working with female coworkers, or in worst case, sometimes it could be worse if he has female employees. So the wife, in some situations, might feel uncomfortable. So she might say, hey, we should have a boundary that whatever it is, you don't go out with a female coworker to lunch at all, or you let me know if that happens, or you don't talk about certain topics and you stick to business topics, or you don't text each other after work. Again, there are different types of boundaries you can, and sometimes, in some cases, should not impose, but introduce into your relationship for the purpose of protecting your relationship from outside negative influences. Now, I sort of snuck in the healthy boundaries, right? It was hard to explain it in a vacuum as just a philosophical concept. So I did introduce the healthy boundaries because this is really what you're supposed to shoot for. This is what your goal is in a healthy relationship. Another boundary, for example, might be we don't argue in front of the kids. That might be something that you both agree on. It is not healthy for the kids for them to see us argue. Other couples might say, no, it's okay to disagree as long as the way we disagree is appropriate and respectful. So again, there are different nuances. It's not all the same. It's not a cookie cutter. It's not like a one size boundary fits all relationships. That is simply not true. And that's one of the traps and the mistakes and the tragic mistakes that happen from a lot of the suggestions and advice that's given out there online or sometimes even in therapy, where it's like a manual to try to impose it on a relationship. So I'm trying to show you there are really variables, there's nuance, and it's going to make a big difference. For example, if you're the type of couple that really could disagree in front of the kids, but as long as you handle that disagreement in an appropriate way that actually might even be beneficial for the kids, it wouldn't make sense to make a boundary saying you should never argue in front of the kids. But there are many, many couples who would just say, hey, we just don't argue in front of the kids, right? There are different ways of approaching it. Another thing might be no triangling. No triangling is a very important boundary where we don't talk to the kids for the purpose of communicating something to the spouse. So that might look like the guy saying something to the kid, but his real goal is that the kid should either repeat it to his mother, which is the guy's wife, or that the mother should overhear what he said, and he's really trying to get a message across to her. And we can talk about this for hours and hours on end. I'm just going to give you the overview of different types of boundaries. There could be a boundary around intimacy, sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, where there's an arrangement in husband and wife, depending on the circumstances, where, hey, it's not appropriate in our relationship, or what is appropriate for our relationship? Is it okay if you look at pornography or if you masturbate? Should you tell the wife? Do you have to let her know? Do you need to be on the same page? Many couples won't even get to that point of conversation. Some of them do need to get there. Some of them get there and have those types of boundaries. My point is, it is very custom made. It very much reflects the experiences of the couple. Boundaries is not something which is meant to be figured out in the first year or 2 or 3 of marriage. It is something which evolves, which should be revisited every 6 to 12 months minimum. Sometimes it could be every 1 to 2 years maximum. Okay, so let me know in the comments if you're getting this. This is a very basic principle, really the starting principle of understanding what boundaries are and understanding what healthy boundaries are. Let's get into, let's sum it up. So what's a healthy boundary? Level 1 boundaries is called mutual boundaries, not an imposed boundary. That's the boundary that most people talk about online. It's actually not helpful and healing for a marriage. There's some value to it sometimes. We'll talk about it soon. Level 1, ideally in a healthy relationship, it's a mutually agreed upon boundary. It's not husband imposing on wife. It's not wife imposing upon husband. It's husband and wife having a conversation, an evolving conversation over the years, over the course of the relationship, which should be improving over time. And it is a symbol of health. That is the ideal boundaries. Like I said, it should be revisited every 6 to 12 months or a little longer than that if that works for you. Okay, now let's get into level 2 boundaries. Level 2 is imposed boundary with an ultimatum. And this is where you know that you have negotiating leverage. For whatever you have a better position in terms of maybe she's financially dependent on you. Maybe, she's not going to leave you because of the kids or because of religious reasons. And you impose a boundary on her, and sometimes vice versa. But I'm talking to guys right now. So let's talk to men, where the guy says, my boundary is, and whatever, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the boundary because we just gave a bunch of examples, but it could be an endless amount of variables surrounding potential affairs or confirmed affairs or phones or times to be back or commitments, responsibilities, or what's appropriate conversation. But there's no limit. So we've spoken about many ideas. Let's talk about who imposed the boundary and why. So level 2 boundary it's not mutual. It's one party imposes the boundary on the other party, and it comes usually with an ultimatum. And by the way, if you really want to make an effective boundary in level 2, it sort of has to be with an ultimatum. But it's not healthy for the marriage. The marriage will still survive. And that is in a case where you want to get a specific action or thing done or not done, and you want your wife to be on the same page, and you'll get her to listen to you superficially. Pay close attention to this word, gentlemen, all right? Superficially. In other words, you might say, my boundary is that you should let me know A, or I should have access to your phone, or I should be able to know if this and that happens. And she may acquiesce, she may concede, she may give in, she may say yes and actually do it. However, you have not captured her heart. Okay? And why is that? Because it was an imposed boundary. It was a boundary which you said, this has to be done or else. Or else. Whatever that or else might be. It could be threatening divorce. It could be threatening with withdrawing emotionally. It could be threatening with withholding help or withholding love. But it's sort of a boundary that you're imposing on her. And it is, you will get what you want, whatever that is that you want, but you're not going to capture the inside of her heart because her heart is someplace else. I strongly discourage this type of boundary. Quite frankly, to put it in simple English, it's a dumb idea. I know dumb is not a fancy word, but it's as simple as it's a stupid idea, okay? Unless you want, here's the caveat, if you want a mediocre marriage, where you are controlling her to some degree and getting what you want superficially, but you will not capture her heart, you won't capture her love, you won't capture trust, you won't capture emotional connection, and you won't capture the feeling that you both had when you fell in love. But a lot of guys end up going with this boundary, and sometimes even therapists will propose this type of boundary, and it is detrimental to the marriage. Again, unless that's a type of marriage that you want. You don't want an amazing, well, everybody says that they want an amazing marriage, but they're not necessarily working, committed to working towards it. But some guys are really, really okay with an average marriage. That is just a fact. As much as I thought it wouldn't be true, I found that to be true over many, many years. A lot of guys are okay with an okay marriage. They're not necessarily shooting for an amazing marriage that's full of passion. They're fine with it, just mediocre. Things, the status quo being the way they want it to be, even though it's drifted apart. It's light years from where they thought it was going to be. That's another type of boundary. There's a third type of boundary which comes with again, it's a level 3 imposed boundary, also with an ultimatum, but in this case, you will not even get superficially what you want. Your wife will not give in. She won't even give in on a superficial external level because there's a deeper issue. And the deeper issue is so deep that the boundary is bound to make things worse, even superficially. So in level 1, the marriage is really healthy. It is getting better. It has the typical challenges that marriages have. But over time, it does get better, not worse. You guys getting it? You guys are with me? Okay? Now, level 2, you're going to get what you want. The boundary is not mutual. It's one party imposing on another. But you're going to get what you want, but you're not going to capture your spouse's heart. Level 3 is you're not going to even get what you want because the issues are so deep that your spouse will fight you. And the reason for that will be typically because your spouse has been frustrated for a long time in the marriage, which is very common that women have when you have marriage cancer, and we've spoken about it many times what marriage cancer is, so you check previous videos, the woman will typically believe that she has already invested many years in the relationship and the guy wasn't doing it, okay? Or wasn't doing it the way she needed him to do it. So when she feels that, and now you come along with a boundary, with a demand, with an expectation, unless you're totally fine exiting the marriage and you just want a superficial, like a level 2 relationship, this is going to cause more problems to the relationship because she typically has an idea of you stuck in her head, which may or may not be true, but it's certainly true to her. For example, guys, let me know if this makes sense. I'm trying to give easy examples so we can sort of get away from the science and the philosophy and understand practically what we're talking about. If your wife believes that you're controlling, if that's the belief she has in her head, then putting a boundary actually undermines you because that just serves and cements and feeds the picture in her head of you being controlling. The same thing would be if she believes that you're selfish or manipulative or angry. Whatever it is, the image, the idea, the opinion that she has of you, which is stuck in her head. And again, guys, please understand, it doesn't really make a difference if that is true or not. What matters is if it's true to her. Then if you come along with a boundary, you're bound, okay, it's a play on words. If you come with a boundary, you are bound to make the marriage worse because in her mind, you're picking on superficial issues. So for example, if you're picking on your potential affair or the way she hogs her phone or she protects her information, you want to know more, but she feels you're controlling, you looking to get more information will actually feed that picture in her head and you're going to get resistance. You're going to get resistance. And to go really deeper, if she's been unhappy for a while and she doesn't trust the investments you're making in the marriage, she feels that for whatever reason, whatever you're doing isn't genuine. It's not sincere. It's an act. It is fake. Doesn't matter if you mean it sincerely. I'm saying the way she's interpreting it, right? If she's looking at you that way, coming with a boundary is bound to make things worse. I think it's more helpful to give you an exercise that you can try on your own to see what I call, this is not a level 1, 2, or 3, I call it 2B, because this is testing. This is testing. Some guys don't know what's going to be the response from her. They're not sure if they're level 1, 2, or 3. It's not like black and white, crystal. It's not set in stone. It's not crystal clear. It is emotions and relationships and marriages are like sometimes gray. So one way is to test it. But when you test it minus an ultimatum. In other words, if you're not sure if your marriage is a level 1, 2, or 3, like if it's going to be mutual and it's going to improve the relationship, is it going to be imposed, but you'll get what you want, but the relationship will sort of be stagnant, or you're going to get outright resistance, you test it with the boundary, but you take away the ultimatum. Take away the ultimatum. And I said, I support this idea, generally speaking. I mean, without talking to you directly, right? I don't know, but generally speaking, for many situations, it would be okay to test it, and you're going to see from the response if this is a level 1, 2, or 3. But you do it without attachment. You do it as an exploration. You do it as a diagnosis, as sort of like a blood test for your marriage. Very, very basic, really. And this is not a long-term strategy. It's just to really stabilize your idea of what's going on in the marriage and to get a reading and to get a sense, is it a level 2? Is it a level 3? Usually, if you feel you have to test it and you're not sure, it's usually a 2 or 3. Most times, it is not a 1 if you're testing it. But sometimes you might be surprised if you try to impose the boundary and you say, hey, I expect you to be home at a certain time, or I want to see your phone, or I want to have this type of openness. You may be pleasantly surprised to see that you have a level 1 situation and your marriage may be a little better than you thought it is, or a lot better than you thought it is. But if you have a deeper issue, and you're getting the resistance, or you're not getting the resistance, she listens to you, but you have a level 2 where she's going to stay stuck because she does have the wrong picture of you stuck in her head, then what you need is deeper help. And in fact, that's one of the things, one of the first things that I do when I'm working with men is to figure out how to read your wife's mind, to figure out what is that picture of you which is stuck in her head, because until you have that, you're not going to be able to put in level 1 boundaries. You're not going to be able to introduce mutually agreed upon boundaries which reflect the understanding and the communication and the bonding and the friendship between you. It's going to be you versus her, right? Or her versus you, depending on who's trying to impose that. But typically it's the guy trying to impose it, just about in all cases. So in that case, in order to really get to the bottom, you really have to be able to read her mind. And that is one of the fundamental principles that we teach in Amazing Marriage Fast Track, that we help guys understand and apply with customized support to see, okay, how do I read her mind? How do I interpret what's going on in her head? When is the right time to impose a boundary? What boundary would be helpful for my marriage? What wouldn't be? If you want to explore if this is for you, if the strategy is for you, if the process is for you, you can type help in the chat. It is a process, though. I want you to know it's not a magic fix. It's not an overnight fix. It's not something we're going to figure out in a half hour or an hour. But if you are committed to really understanding how to read your wife's mind, how to understand what keeps her stuck, how to see what is it that is sabotaging you from being able to put in helpful and healthy boundaries, like I said, you can type help in the comment under this video, and somebody on the team will reach out to you. We'll have a conversation to explore if our Amazing Marriage Fast Track strategy would be an appropriate fit for your marriage or if not. But regardless, I hope you guys gained a lot from this training. You have a very specific exercise you can do to explore the state of your marriage, and in terms of what type of response you will get from her that will give you feedback on, are you a level 1, 2, or 3? I hope you guys gained a lot from this, and I look forward to seeing your comments and questions. God bless you, and take care.